There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a woman when she realizes her life has been a performance she didn't audition for. Not the comfortable silence of contentment, nor the heavy quiet of grief. This is the silence of recalibration, of a mind working faster than the heart can follow. I discovered mine on the morning of my 25th wedding anniversary, standing in my closet, running my fingers across the burgundy silk dress I'd had altered 3 times to fit perfectly. 25 years. A quarter-century of building something I believed was real. My name is Vivian Ashworth, and I was 52 years old when I learned that the foundation of my existence had been constructed on sand. The party was my idea. Richard had suggested something intimate, just the 2 of us at that restaurant in the city where he'd proposed. But I wanted celebration. I wanted our friends, our family, the people who had witnessed our journey. I wanted to stand in our home and feel the weight of what we'd built together. How beautifully ironic that I would get exactly what I asked for. I'd spent 3 months planning every detail. The caterers from that French place Richard loved. The flowers, white roses and eucalyptus. The same arrangement from our wedding, recreated from photographs I'd kept in acid-free tissue paper for 25 years. The string quartet that would play Debussy because Richard always said classical music made him feel like he was living inside a painting. I wanted him to feel painted, framed, preserved in the amber of our history. What I didn't know then was that history was about to be rewritten. The guests began arriving at 7. Our home filled with the perfume of expensive candles and the low murmur of congratulations. Richard stood beside me in his charcoal suit, his silver hair catching the candlelight, looking every bit the distinguished husband, the successful architect, the man who had promised me forever in a garden 25 years ago. I watched him greet our guests with that particular warmth he had, the way he could make anyone feel like the most important person in the room. I had loved that about him once. Now I understand it was simply practice, a lifetime of making people believe what he wanted them to believe. Our daughter Margot arrived with her husband, her belly just beginning to show with our first grandchild. Our son Thomas came alone, as he always did, preferring his independence to the complications of commitment. I wondered briefly if he'd inherited that from his father, then pushed the thought away. Tonight was not for doubt. Tonight was for celebration. The champagne flowed. The quartet played. Our friends raised their glasses to 25 years of what they called the real thing. And I smiled and accepted their praise and believed in that moment that I had done something remarkable simply by staying. That's what we tell women, isn't it? That endurance is its own reward, that the staying is the achievement. I was about to learn that the staying was the lie. She arrived at 9:15. I noticed the door opening because I notice everything. It's the curse of a hostess, the constant awareness of entrance and exit, of empty glasses and full ashtrays, of conversations that need rescuing. But this time, what I noticed stopped my heart. She was young, perhaps 30, with that particular glow that comes from either exceptional skincare or the absolute certainty that you belong wherever you are. Dark hair swept over one shoulder, a dress that cost more than my first car. And beneath that dress, unmistakable even from across the room, was the rounded curve of pregnancy. She walked into my home like she owned it. For a moment, I thought there had been some mistake, a wrong address, a confused guest. But then I saw her eyes find Richard, and I saw Richard's face, and I understood that there was no mistake at all. This was the truth. Walking through my door, wearing my husband's child. The room didn't go quiet, not yet. The quartet kept playing. Conversations continued. But I felt the shift in the air, the way you can feel a storm before the first drop of rain. I felt it in my bones, in my blood, in the space behind my eyes where tears should have been, but weren't. Richard moved toward her, not quickly, he was too smart for that, but with the kind of measured pace that told me he was calculating, always calculating. "Vivian," he said, his voice pitched for my ears only. "I need to handle something. Give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes. As if this could be handled. As if the woman carrying his child could be managed like a scheduling conflict." I watched him guide her toward the study, his hand on the small of her back, that gesture of intimacy I had thought belonged to me. I watched our guests begin to notice, the whispers starting at the edges of the room like fire catching dry leaves. I watched my daughter's face change as she realized what she was seeing, and I smiled. I smiled because I had been a hostess for 25 years, and hostesses don't crack. I smiled because my mother raised me to keep my composure when the world was burning. I smiled because the alternative was to shatter into pieces on my own polished floors. and I would not give anyone that satisfaction. The next 15 minutes were a masterclass in social performance. I circulated, I refreshed drinks. I laughed at jokes I didn't hear. I accepted compliments on the flowers, the music, the catering. I performed the role of happy wife with the precision of an actress who has rehearsed for a quarter century. But inside, something was shifting. Not breaking, shifting. Like tectonic plates beginning their slow, inevitable slide toward destruction. When Richard returned to the party, his face was composed but his eyes were wild. He found me near the bar, took my elbow with a grip that was harder than it needed to be. "She's lying," he said. "She's unstable. I ended things months ago and she's—" "Ended things," I repeated. The words felt strange in my mouth, foreign. So there were things to end. He had the decency to flinch. "Vivian, please, not here, not tonight." "Not tonight," I agreed. "Tonight is our anniversary. Tonight we celebrate." I pulled my arm from his grip and walked away. I walked to the bar and poured myself a glass of champagne. I walked to the string quartet and requested Claire de Lune. I walked through my party like a woman who had not just discovered that her entire life was a fiction, and I began to plan. The woman's name was Serena. I learned this 2 days later, sitting across from a private investigator named Marcus Chen in his sparse downtown office. He had been recommended by my attorney, a woman named Grace who had handled my family's legal matters for 15 years, and who, upon hearing my situation, had simply nodded and said, "I know exactly who you need." Marcus spread photographs across his desk like tarot cards, revealing a future I never asked for. Serena Hayes, 31, interior designer, previously engaged to a tech executive who had called off the wedding 6 months before she appeared in Richard's life. A pattern, Marcus said. A preference for married men, for complicated situations, for chaos she could walk into and call home. "How long?" I asked. 18 months that I can confirm. Possibly longer. 18 months. While I planned anniversary parties and grandchild nurseries. While I believed in something that was already dead. The pregnancy? 4 months along. She's been seeing Dr. Werner at City General, high-risk OB. I have her appointment schedule if you want it. I looked at the photographs. Serena leaving Richard's office. Serena entering a hotel downtown. Serena and Richard at a restaurant I didn't recognize. His hand covering hers on the white tablecloth, their heads bent together like conspirators. "I want everything," I said. "Every receipt, every email, every moment you can find. But I need something else. I need a geneticist. Someone discreet. Someone who can do DNA work quietly." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't ask why. That's what I was paying him for, to execute, not to question. "I know someone," he said. "Dr. Catherine Walsh, runs a private clinic, does work for custody cases, inheritance disputes. Very discreet. Set up a meeting." I left his office with a folder full of evidence and a clarity I hadn't felt in years, perhaps ever. The fog of my marriage had lifted, and what I saw beneath it was not devastation, but opportunity. Richard had given me a gift, though he didn't know it yet. He had given me freedom disguised as betrayal, and I intended to use every piece of it. The weeks that followed were an education in patience. I had always been patient. You don't raise 2 children and manage a household and support a husband's career without learning to wait. But this was different. This was the patience of a hunter. The stillness before the strike. I continued to play the role of unsuspecting wife. I cooked Richard's favorite meals. I asked about his projects. I lay beside him at night and listened to him breathe and calculated. Always calculating. He had stopped sleeping with me months ago, I realized. Had blamed it on stress, on exhaustion, on age. I had believed him because believing him was easier than questioning. Easier than acknowledging that the man beside me had become a stranger. Serena, I learned, was not patient. She called Richard constantly, showed up at his office unannounced, sent him photographs of her growing belly with captions that ranged from tender to threatening. She wanted acknowledgement. She wanted his name on that child. She wanted what I had spent 25 years building, and she wanted it now. I could have hated her for that. Perhaps I should have. But watching her desperation through Marcus's reports, I felt something closer to pity. She didn't understand what she was asking for. She wanted Richard's love, his commitment, his future. She didn't realize she was fighting for the right to be lied to. I had won that prize years ago. I knew what it was worth. Dr. Catherine Walsh was exactly what I needed. Precise, professional, and utterly without judgment. She sat across from me in her office with its clean white walls, and explained paternity testing with the calm of someone discussing the weather. The standard approach is a blood draw from the mother during pregnancy, she said. Non-invasive prenatal paternity testing, 99% accurate, but you need the mother's consent or access to a sample. What about from the father? Dr. Walsh's expression didn't change. That's more complicated. You'd need his sample and the mother's, or his sample and the child's after birth. The former requires cooperation or deception. The latter requires patience. What if I had reason to believe, I said carefully, that the child might not be his at all? Now her eyebrows rose, just slightly, just enough to tell me I had surprised her. That would change things considerably. If you could obtain a sample from the alleged father and the mother, we could determine paternity definitively. But if there's another potential father in the picture, there might be. I told her what Marcus had discovered. Before Richard, there had been the tech executive, a man named David Hollister, who had called off his engagement to Serena 6 months before she appeared in my husband's life. A man who, according to Marcus's research, had reconnected with Serena briefly during the period when she would have conceived. Dr. Walsh listened without interruption. When I finished, she nodded once. Get me samples from all 3 men, she said. The husband, the ex-fiancé, and ideally something from the mother if you can manage it. Give me 3 weeks after that and I'll give you the truth. The truth. Such a simple word for such a complicated thing. I collected Richard's sample easily, a glass he'd used at dinner, sealed in a plastic bag while he showered. Men are careless when they believe themselves safe. Richard had been safe for 25 years. He'd forgotten what vigilance felt like. David Hollister was more difficult, but not impossible. Marcus arranged an accidental meeting at his gym. A young woman who struck up a conversation about protein shakes and emerged with his discarded water bottle. The girl had no idea what she was participating in. She thought she was helping with a custody case, which, in a way, she was. Serena's sample came from an opportunity I couldn't have planned. She showed up at my home on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the anniversary party, while Richard was at work. I opened the door to find her standing on my porch, her pregnancy now obvious, her face arranged in an expression of defiance that was trying very hard to mask terror. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said, "we need to talk." I could have slammed the door. I could have called the police. Instead, I smiled and stepped aside. "Please," I said, "come in. I'll make tea." She sat in my living room like a defendant awaiting sentencing. I watched her take in the photographs on the walls, the art Richard and I had collected over the years, the evidence of a life she was trying to dismantle. Her hands moved constantly, touching her belly, smoothing her dress, adjusting her hair. The nervous energy of someone who had made a terrible decision and was beginning to understand its cost. "He told me you knew," she said, when I returned with the tea. "He told me you had an arrangement, that your marriage was convenient," I offered. "Performative, dead," she flinched. "Something like that." I poured her tea and watched her wrap her hands around the cup, grateful for something to hold. "And you believed him." "I loved him." Past tense already? Her eyes met mine, and I saw something there I hadn't expected. Intelligence. Behind the desperation and the poor choices, there was a sharp mind trying to navigate an impossible situation. "He promised he would leave you," she said, "after the baby. He said he just needed time, but now—" She looked down at her belly, and when she looked up again, there were tears on her cheeks. "He wants me to get rid of it. He says if I don't, he'll deny everything. He'll destroy my career. He'll make sure no one believes me." I set down my teacup with the precise click of porcelain against porcelain. "That does sound like Richard. You don't seem surprised." I stopped being surprised by my husband a long time ago. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her careful makeup. "I don't know what to do. I don't have anyone. My family won't speak to me. My friends think I'm a homewrecker. I thought, I don't know what I thought, that you might understand, that you might help me." Help her. The woman who had slept with my husband, who had shown up at my anniversary party, like a grenade in a designer dress, who was carrying what she believed was his child. She was asking me for help. And in that moment, watching her cry in my living room, I made a decision that would change everything. "I'll help you," I said, "but you need to understand something first. The man you think you know, the man who made you promises and told you I was merely an inconvenience, that man doesn't exist. Richard has spent 40 years becoming exactly what each person needs him to be. You saw what he wanted you to see. I saw what he wanted me to see. The only truth is that he sees us as obstacles or opportunities, never as people. She was staring at me now, the tea forgotten. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want the truth. About the baby, about him, about everything." "I don't understand." "You will." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small collection kit, the kind Dr. Walsh had given me. "I need a sample. Cheek swab, blood, hair with the root. Any of those will work. I have reason to believe that Richard might not be the father of your child." Her face went pale. "That's not David Hollister," I said, and watched her flinch like I'd struck her. "You reconnected with him around the time you would have conceived." "I'm not judging, I'm just asking for the truth." The silence stretched between us like a wire about to snap. I could see her calculating, the same way I calculated, the same way Richard calculated. We were all strategists now, moving pieces on a board none of us had chosen to play. "If I do this," she said, finally, "if I give you what you're asking for, what happens then? Then we find out whose child you're carrying, and then we decide together what to do with that information." She stared at me for a long moment, then she reached for the collection kit. 3 weeks later, I sat in Dr. Walsh's office and learned the truth. The child was not Richard's. The probability of paternity for David Hollister was 99.7%. Richard's was 0. I held the report in my hands and felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not for myself, though there was that too. Relief for the child. This baby would not enter the world as a weapon in someone else's war. It would not be used as leverage or denied as inconvenience. It would simply be what it was: a child created in confusion, but innocent of its parents' mistakes. "What will you do with this?" Dr. Walsh asked. "What needs to be done?" I left her office with the report tucked into my bag and drove to Richard's firm. He was in a meeting when I arrived, the receptionist informed me, but I could wait in his office if I liked. I smiled and said that would be perfect. I had learned, over 25 years, how to make myself unthreatening, how to be the wife who never caused trouble, never demanded attention, never made scenes. I sat in his leather chair and looked at the photographs on his walls. Richard shaking hands with mayors, governors, developers. Richard accepting awards. Richard at the center of every frame, commanding attention, demanding admiration. There were no photographs of our family, not one. Had I ever noticed that before? Had I ever let myself see? He returned 45 minutes later, laughing at something his partner had said, and stopped in the doorway when he saw me. "Vivian?" His voice was careful, measured. The voice of a man who has been caught and is trying to determine how much has been discovered. "What are you doing here?" "Close the door, Richard." He did, slowly. His eyes moved over my face, trying to read what I knew, what I had learned, how bad this was about to be. "I came to discuss the terms of our divorce." His expression flickered, surprise, then calculation, then a careful neutrality that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Vivian, I know the last few weeks have been difficult, but I'm not finished." I pulled the folder from my bag and laid it on his desk. "This is a DNA analysis confirming that Serena Hayes' child is not yours. The father is David Hollister, her ex-fiancé. You've been threatening her with exposure and ruin over a child that was never your responsibility." The color drained from his face. It was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected, watching him realize that his leverage had evaporated, that the situation he had been trying to manage had slipped entirely beyond his control. "How did you? It doesn't matter how. What matters is that I know. What matters is that your partners are going to know. What matters is that every person who has ever looked at you and seen a man of integrity is going to know exactly what kind of man you are." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You wouldn't dare. You'd destroy everything we've built." "We didn't build anything, Richard. You built a facade and I believed it. You built a lie and I decorated it with 25 years of my life. That's not partnership, that's performance." I stood up, straightening my jacket with hands that didn't tremble. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to agree to an equitable divorce settlement that reflects my contributions to this marriage, financial, emotional, and professional. You're going to leave Serena Hayes alone because the child isn't yours and your threats are baseless. And you're going to explain to our children why their father is a stranger they never knew. You can't, I can, I have. The only question is how much damage you want to sustain in the process." I walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. "One more thing. The medical records, the financial transfers, the property in Serena's name that you bought with money from our joint accounts. I have all of it. Every receipt, every email, every photograph. You've been sloppy, Richard. You thought you were smarter than everyone around you. You weren't. You were just married to a woman who didn't want to see. I opened the door. Now I see everything. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Richard fought, of course. He fought the settlement, fought the property division, fought the exposure of his affairs to his partners and his children. He hired the most expensive attorneys in the city, deployed every resource at his disposal, threw everything he had at maintaining the life he had built on deception. But I had the truth. And in the end, truth is a weapon that cannot be defended against. His partners discovered not just Serena, but 3 other women over the past decade. Women he had seduced with the same promises, the same lies, the same careful construction of a man who didn't exist. His reputation, so carefully cultivated, crumbled like ash in water. Our children learned who their father was. Margot wept and raged, and eventually found a therapist who helped her understand that his failures were not her inheritance. Thomas went silent for 3 months, then called me one evening and said simply, "I'm sorry I didn't see it, Mom." I told him there was nothing to be sorry for. We had all been looking at the same illusion. We had all believed what we wanted to believe. Serena had the baby in April, a girl with David's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. She reached out to David after our conversation, and something fragile and complicated began to grow between them. I don't know if it will survive. I don't know if they will build something real or simply repeat old patterns in new configurations. But I know that the child will be raised by people who want her, which is more than Richard ever offered. I kept the house. Not out of sentiment, the sentiment had died long ago, but because it was mine. I had chosen every piece of furniture, every painting, every carefully arranged flower in every carefully chosen vase. Richard had lived there, but he had never inhabited it. He had been a guest in a home I had built, and now the guest was gone. On the first morning after the divorce was final, I woke early and walked through the empty rooms. The silence was different now. Not the silence of waiting, of performing, of holding my breath and hoping the illusion would last. This was the silence of completion, of peace. I made coffee and sat on the porch and watched the sun rise over the garden I had planted 15 years ago, when the children were still small and the future seemed like something to be anticipated rather than survived. The roses were blooming. They had never cared about the chaos inside. They had simply grown toward the light. I thought about revenge and what it meant, and whether what I had done qualified. I hadn't destroyed Richard. I hadn't set out to ruin him or take everything he had or leave him with nothing. I had simply stopped protecting him. I had stopped pretending. I had stopped being the shield between his lies and their consequences. The destruction that followed was his own doing. Every revelation, every scandal, every lost partnership and fractured relationship, those were the seeds he had planted, finally blooming into their inevitable harvest. I had merely stopped pulling the weeds. There's a kind of revenge in that, I suppose. The revenge of truth. The revenge of refusing to participate in someone else's fiction any longer. But it doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like freedom. Last week, Margot brought the baby to visit. Eleanor, they named her, after Margot's grandmother, my mother. I held her in my arms and looked at her perfect face and felt something I had forgotten was possible. Hope. Not for revenge or justice or vindication. Just hope. For her, for Margot, for Thomas, for myself. We have survived something, my children and I. We have walked through fire and emerged, not unscathed, but still standing, still capable of growth. Richard called last month. I saw his name on my phone and let it ring until it stopped. He left a voicemail, something about wanting to talk, wanting to explain, wanting closure. I deleted it without listening. Closure is not something he can give me. Closure is not a conversation or an apology or an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Closure is what I built myself, brick by brick, in the months after I discovered his betrayal. It is the life I am living now, the relationships I am rebuilding, the person I am becoming without the weight of his deception pressing me into shapes I was never meant to hold. I think about Serena sometimes, not with anger, not anymore. She was young and foolish and desperate for love, and she found a man who was expert at manufacturing its appearance. She believed him the way I believed him, completely, blindly, with the kind of faith that doesn't survive contact with reality. But she learned, we both did. And perhaps that's the only grace available in situations like these, the hard-won wisdom of survival. The champagne I poured at my anniversary party is a memory now. The party itself feels like something that happened to someone else, some other woman in some other life. I look at photographs from that night, and barely recognize the person smiling at the camera. The careful hostess with the perfect hair and the breaking heart. She's gone now, that woman. The one who smiled through agony, who performed happiness as a full-time occupation, who believed that endurance was the same as love. In her place is someone I'm still learning to know, someone who makes decisions based on truth rather than fear, someone who sets boundaries instead of accommodating violations, someone who, when confronted with betrayal, no longer asks what she did wrong, but instead asks what she deserves. I deserve better. We all do. The evening light is fading now, turning the garden gold and copper and rose. I pour myself a glass of wine, good wine, the kind Richard always said we were saving for special occasions that never came. And I sit in the silence of my own home, my own life, my own future. Tomorrow I'm having lunch with Grace, my attorney, who has become something like a friend. Next week, I'm starting a consulting business, using the organizational skills I developed over 25 years of managing a household and a career and a husband's reputation. The week after that, Margot is bringing Eleanor again, and we're going to take her to the botanical garden where I used to bring Margot when she was small. Life continues. That's the thing no one tells you about survival. It's not an ending, it's a beginning. You don't emerge from the fire and find yourself complete. You emerge and discover that there is still so much living to do, so much growing, so much becoming. I am becoming someone I might have been all along, if I hadn't spent so many years becoming what Richard needed instead. He thought silence was surrender. He thought my patience was weakness. He thought he could build a life on lies, and I would simply continue to believe, to trust, to perform the role of happy wife until death did us part. He was wrong. Silence was strategy. Patience was preparation. And when the moment came, when I sat in that investigator's office and learned the scope of his deception, I was ready. Not for destruction, but for liberation. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. The years I spent with him. The energy I invested in a marriage that was never what I believed. The time I lost to loving someone who was incapable of loving me back. I don't regret it. I can't. Those years gave me my children. They gave me experience and strength, and the kind of wisdom you can only earn through suffering. They made me who I am, not in spite of the pain, but because of it. And who I am, finally, is free. The last light fades from the garden. The roses close their petals against the coming dark. Somewhere in the house, my phone buzzes with a message I don't need to check, a demand I don't need to meet, a performance I no longer have to give. I finish my wine. I watch the stars emerge. I breathe. This is what they don't tell you about revenge. The best kind doesn't destroy your enemy. The best kind sets you free. The best kind is the life you build in the ashes of the one they burned. The peace you find in the silence after the storm. Richard took 25 years from me. He took my trust, my faith, my belief in the life we shared. But he couldn't take this. This evening, this garden, this quiet knowing that I survived, that I am still here, that I am finally, completely, mine. The night settles around me like a blanket. The silence is perfect. And somewhere in the darkness, I am smiling. Not the practiced smile of the hostess, not the brittle smile of the wife, but the genuine, unguarded smile of a woman who has stopped pretending. She poured champagne at her anniversary party and watched her world collapse. She hired a DNA specialist and discovered the truth. She took the pieces of her shattered life and built something new, and now she sits in her garden, in her silence, in her freedom, and she knows, this is not an ending. This is where it begins. This is where it begins. This is where it begins. This is where it begins.